Dartmoor, the biggest stretch of wild country in southern England. 364 square miles of rivers, moors and wildlife. Dartmoor was one of the first 4 national parks, established in 1951 for the health and enjoyment of the people.
So this is my trusty van that I lived in for many years and spent many happy times on Dartmoor. This is not my countryside, this is not my land. You tell me it's your property and that I'm not allowed, but please be kind. We are under the same stars tonight, and the right to roam is my right. We are under the same stars tonight.
Sylvia Sayer was a fearless campaigner and a really warm-hearted person. I was 16 when I first saw her and 17 when I met her. It was the 26th of August 1971, and I did a wonderful ride right across the moor, which I'd never done before, from west to east. And so the moor was sort of in my head and in my heart. And straight from the ride, we went to Princetown, to the village hall for a meeting. And all these farmers were there in this smoky room saying, oh yes, you know, it should be, Swinkham should be flooded. And suddenly this person stood up and spoke and said that how wonderful Dartmoor was and how special and how it must be saved. And that was Sylvia Sayer. And that was my first view of her. And I thought, oh my gosh, isn't she wonderful? I would so love to be like her. And immediately we struck a bond. She was so generous and kind to me and really inspired me even more to become a campaigner. Sylvia invited me to stay at Cater and we had lovely picnics, and it was just a summer of absolute divine glory. I just remember it with so much happiness. She wasn't tall. She's probably about my height, so about 5 foot and a bit. She was quite plump. She had a round face and a very lovely smile and a very, very warm person. You wouldn't know that when you saw her in battle at a public inquiry, cross-examining somebody. She was 50 years older than me, but she felt like a contemporary, you know, and we giggled together. So we had tremendous fun. It was all such fun, as well as very serious campaigning. Well, the threat was to flood this beautiful valley with a reservoir. So there would have been a dam at one end and then the whole thing would have filled up. Of course, it's a very shallow basin. 750 acres would have been lost. We had to fight a parliamentary bill because that's how these structures were built. Sylvia has a wonderful description and a drawing of the aldermen of Plymouth coming and standing by Whiteworks and looking out over the valley with their Homburg hats and their pointy town shoes. One stout alderman saying to another, this is just a barren waste. Let's flood it for a reservoir. The bill went to Parliament and they threw it out before they'd even heard the case against. So the case was not made sufficiently well for the MPs to approve it. So that was a great victory. It was thrown out at that point, 3rd of December 1970.
Sylvia Sayer was chair of the Dartmoor Preservation Association from 1951 to 1973. Known as the Shield of Dartmoor, she led countless ferocious campaigns against the military, the water boards, and the clay companies. Officials would dread her letters arriving on the doormat. She was always in the newspapers, defending Dartmoor and public access, but she wasn't always successful.
The valley of the West Oakmont River at Meldon in the Dartmoor National Park was once one of the loveliest in Britain. It was unique, unspoiled and wild. The lively little river flowed over a bed of many-coloured rock in which fragments of garnet flashed back at the sun. Waterfalls tumbled into deep pools bordered by shady spinneys of beech and ash, or by wider banks of close green turf, where families played and picnicked in summer, and where even in winter there were sheltered places for the small, lonely tents of the adventurous young. Then there was a scare about arsenic, a very genuine scare about arsenic and lead in the water, and we got chemical reports. However, all that was rejected as well. So in the end, it was approved and it went through. And in 1970, Alderman William Wilkie, stood in this valley. Sylvia wrote, "A little waterboard Napoleon, incongruous in the Dartmoor scene in his black Homburg hat and overcoat, Mr. Wilkie posed for the photographers and celebrated his moment of triumph by pressing a button and blowing up a tree." And now it's a reservoir, it's just still water, with this whopping great concrete monstrosity, absolutely huge, slap bang in a national park. It's just an outrage. When Peter Mills, the West Devon MP, was knighted, Sylvia Sayre was disgusted because he had been responsible for Meldon Reservoir, all the things that were destroying the moor. And so she said, well, if he's to be knighted, then I shall knight my donkey, Sir Erastus. And if you're a campaigner, you can't stop because you lose a battle. You pick yourself up and you carry on. We're just on the edge of the Dartmoor National Park, a very special place, which is a prehistoric landscape. These stones all have meaning. They might be hut circles, stone rows, stone circles. And yet we're right on the doorstep of huge, huge industrial workings, the china clay workings, tungsten workings, mica dams, solar farms, right, kind of encroaching on this beautiful national park. But behind me, there is a wall of china clay waste. And if it had not been for Sylvia in particular, this place where we are now would have been engulfed in china clay waste. At that time, the companies campaigned to keep this area out of the national park, because at that time the park was being designated, the boundaries were being set, and they managed to keep all of this out because they wanted to develop it. Sylvia looked at the maps and gave it some thought and realised that if the two companies actually worked together and shared tipping space, they didn't need to dump on this beautiful shore moor, Saddlesborough. And so she pressed for that, and the DPA and other organisations joined in. Sylvia did persuade the two companies to share tipping space, and that was for 30 years. So that ran until 2008, which seemed at the time, forever, wonderful. But of course, time marches on. Early 2000s, we realised that we had this sword of Damocles hanging over us. And so all the national bodies and the DPA worked together to get the tipping regime revoked completely on this moor so that it was saved forever. And the sad thing is that Sylvia did not live to see it. She always said how we should drink champagne in the hut circles on the side of Shore Moor. Well, we did in 2008, but she was not with us, sadly. It was really due to her that this area is now so open and free and doesn't have a wall of clay waste all over it.
Kate Ashbrook was inspired by Sylvia Sayre to a lifetime working for land access rights. She became secretary, then chair of the Dartmoor Preservation Association, president of the Ramblers, and general secretary of the Open Spaces Society.
It suddenly struck me when I was speaking at a youth summit in Sussex. I just literally probably at the event, I suddenly did the sums and thought, oh my gosh, I am the age now that Sylvia was when I met her, 67. So I'm saying to people, I'm ready to pass on campaigning experience. You'll do it differently. The world is totally different. We've got social media, totally different ways of doing things, but the techniques are the same. And I would love to pass that on and to know that the next generation is still going to campaign for the things that are so important to us.
There's been this amazing, rise in awareness within culture of how important our folkloric heritage is, now. And I think that's why these stories are coming up in activism now. I think that's why when we've been speaking about, you know, saving Dartmoor and the right to access nature and be in nature and commune with nature, I think that's why we've been raising Old Crocken, who's a spirit of the land and a guardian of Dartmoor. I think connecting with our folkloric heritage in the past and understanding how our ancestors' bones are in the earth, in the same earth that has these beautiful tours and shapes in the land that inspire these stories, it just brings an awareness of our ongoing interconnectedness with the land.
The end of 2022, we heard that there was going to be a court case challenging the right to wild camp. And a small group of us gathered together, about 5 of us, around a table in a pub to say, well, we should have a campaign about this and we should really try to raise awareness because it seemed like not many people were talking about it. We formed a small campaign called The Stars Are For Everyone, and that campaign slowly grew. We camped up on Stall Moor, just behind me, overnight, and we started making plans for what might happen if those rights were lost in court.
We organised our first camp really on the land and talked about what could be done. You know, how can we get this information out there to tell people what's happening, and the campaign started from there.
Lewis had put a shout out saying, "Oh, does anyone want to build Crocken?" I think he was quite specific.
Yeah,
wasn't
does
he?
anyone know a giant maker?
Does anyone know a giant maker? And then somebody had answered with this other woman's name who's excellent at building, and then I just sort of thought, well, the thing is, I do actually really want to build that giant.
This figure made of granite and moss and lichen and sedges that had punished this landowner who had kind of overstepped the mark and who had tried to improve Dartmoor and plough up its commons. Ruth Webb, who designed and led the building of Old Crocken, talks about giants as making us bigger than ourselves.
This umbrella being that we can nestle our hopes and dreams within, and there's something in the way in which you can pull a group together when you have something with sound or music and a being that's with you. It can give you that sort of focal point of a meeting place and an energy gathering. And I think we talked a lot. Yeah, we did. We talked a lot about what was the heart of the protest, which essentially ended up being actually love, like love for people, love for land. How we're going to make this Crocken being, and what's the Crocken being going to look like? And we gathered materials, we kind of put it out there. It's like, can we have materials that are in these colours? And has anyone got any withies? Or has anyone got anything beautiful and natural? Does anyone want to gather some lichen that's fallen off trees? They put the skin onto Crocken, and they made the shape of Crocken, and we plaited rushes, and it was beautiful. And then Carol, she had brought along her mother's old curtains. We were like, oh, yes, that's Crocken's cloak.
And then fast forward to the end of 2022 and the court case was heard. We had a rally outside the Royal Courts of Justice in London. And then in January 2023, we heard that the right to wild camp on Dartmoor had been lost. Overnight, we lost these rights that had existed for generations. Floods of people started getting in touch, writing to us, calling us and saying, how can I get involved? And very quickly, a campaign that started with 5 people around a table in a pub was suddenly many, many thousands.
It was a big deal. You know, it was the tipping point, I think, for so many people of having their rights to access to nature, like, taken.
So if you can imagine right here in this tiny place, Cornwood, and there's thousands of people descended upon this village in order to protest the right to wild camp.
It was just such an incredible thing to be part of. It really felt like history history in the making, and to have that many people feeling that sense of injustice, you know, enough is enough.
There's a chap called Dartmoor. He's bought some land and he's decided that we're not allowed to wild camp on it anymore. It's not really on, is it?
We really wanted the music to come from Dartmoor. I put my feelers out and all of them came back with the same tune. Like every single one came back with the same tune. So Old Adam it was, and it's Adam the Poacher.
To arrive having learned that Adam the Poacher song and discovering that actually it kind of fell to me to direct the band on the day. That was a big surprise, you know, and it made me feel very involved, and I'd never really thought about having a right to the land. I've always felt like I'm still always here by permission and that we could be asked to leave at any time.
Thousands and thousands of people in this tiny square.
Make your way that way.
I was here. I was standing there.
Where?
There.
Very far back.
Well, the man with the megaphone telling the tale of old Crocken.
A megaphone?
He had a megaphone.
And then I saw the girt old spirit of the moors, old Crocken himself, grey as granite, and his eyebrows hanging down over his glimmering eyes like sedge.
It was remarkable. There was an air of defiant celebration here in Cornwall, and although I think sadness and grief and loss had brought us all together, it did feel exciting and it felt celebratory, and there was a power of bringing people together and walking in the footsteps of those that had fought for rights of access to the countryside before.
It wasn't just gathering to protest, which is important, but somehow it was more. It was raising the spirit of the land.
Off they all go, up onto the moor, and unbeknownst to them, myself and 30 other musicians and a giant spirit of Crocken, made by Ruth and team, is heading up another route.
Even when we all started walking down here, there were still people all the way back as far as the pub. And people had drums and big banners with eyes on and animals, and they were dressed up. They were singing, drumming.
I remember seeing all sorts of people with all sorts of banners and signs, young and old, all walking up the hill. This conga line on its way to Stall Moor.
To get 3,500 people to a remote corner of Dartmoor was just really elating. You know, absolute moment of elation to see those sorts of numbers turn out and say, and stand up to be counted for, you know, rights to land.
It really was a moment which I think you can't describe or recreate, where for a moment everybody believed this really was the spirit, and perhaps it was. I came home from the Crocken demo, I wrote this song, and it started with, "This is not my countryside, this is not my land. You tell me it's your property and that I'm not allowed, but please be kind. We are under the same stars tonight." And that was my real verse about being descended from an immigrant, my mother from Penang, Malaysia. But I ended up cutting that first verse because nobody else related to it. And it didn't, people didn't want to sing that verse. So that was kind of odd to me to remove it because it felt like part of my journey. But it was really, initially that song was about finding that I had a right to this land when I thought I didn't. And it became a theme song for the Stars Are For Everyone campaign because of the title.
The right to roam is our right. We are under the same stars tonight.
After a massive outcry and one of the biggest land rights protests in a generation, Dartmoor National Park successfully appealed the ban on wild camping, and once again we can freely roam and sleep out under the stars. Until...
The stars are for everyone. We belong, we belong, we belong. Everyone. The stars are for everyone. We belong, we belong, we belong.
The best of folk music has always been steeped in traditional sort of working class struggle.
We belong, we belong, we belong.
Well, we're here at the Supreme Court for the final action in this long-running battle about wild camping on Dartmoor.
Dartmoor is taking his legal challenge to try to end the right to wild camp on Dartmoor all the way to the Supreme Court, having first won his case at the High Court, then been defeated at the Appeals Court after huge protests, and now he's taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. We're here to protest and to say that we think that it's outrageous, really, that one wealthy landowner can try and challenge the public's right to build a wild camp on Dartmoor. But we're also here to say that regardless of what happens today, win or lose, we know that it's always been a bit weird and odd that Dartmoor is the only place in England and Wales where it's legal to wild camp. So when the Supreme Court justices have made their decision, either way, we want the people in that building over there, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, to change the law and to give us a Right to Roam Act in England.
This case is still hanging in the balance, November 2024. Meanwhile, on Dartmoor, the land has become depleted due to intensive farming methods. Land activists and conservationists have joined forces in the struggle to rewild and restore nature.
When I was approaching retirement, having spent a lot of my spare time on Dartmoor and begun to realise that it wasn't just an open-air museum, but was a bit of an ecological disaster area, I started looking round for what needed to be done and what part I could play in it. And George Monbiot's book, Feral, came out around that time, and I read it. And I thought, I think the answers are in this. Very soon after that, I went to a talk in Totnes by Alan Watson Featherstone, the founder of Trees for Life in Scotland, who was the inspiration for the foundation of More Trees, and was very inspired by that talk. So I was in where do I sign mode at the end of it, and at the back of the hall there was a table with a couple of people from More Trees and some leaflets. So I signed there, and that's where it all started.
Yeah, make sure you get
I'm one of the trustees of the charity, in my 8th year now of doing that. Fortunately, our name's quite well known, so we have a steady stream of landowners coming to us saying, will you either supply us with trees or plant trees for us on our land? We're trying now to become a bit more proactive and see where trees, particularly on Dartmoor, need to be to expand the existing woodland. I was pleased to hear More Trees described as the largest single creator of new woodland on Dartmoor in the 21st century. We're claiming somewhere above 160,000 since we started.
The very fact that there is so much scrub and so much variety in this place, it's different. And this, more than any other bit of the moor, is what the rest of the moor could be like. It's not all trees and it's not all grazing. It's a mixture.
This is where all your birds are on Dartmoor. They're all in places like this. You know, you've got nightjar here in the evenings, churring away in spring. You've got cuckoos. This is an amazing place for cuckoo in this valley. You've got snipe happily breeding in the bogs. In similar places to this, you've got windchat. You've got tree pipit, which elsewhere is getting a scarce bird now. Packed with willow warbler, you know, really common here. Yet you go off Dartmoor to other places, and the willow warbler fast disappearing. I love it. This is a valley that's just quietly rewilding itself. It's ever so simple. What you want in Dartmoor is woodland in the valleys, going to heaths on the slopes and up towards the top, and then the blanket bog right on top. And if you get those three things, you will have restored Dartmoor.
It boggles the mind, really, when you think about it, about all the thousands and thousands of other species we share this place with, and how we don't give any of them a second thought most of the time. You know, we're living our human lives with all of our worries and concerns and issues, and these things live or die according to what we do as humans, according to the way we might use land, according to what we want to take from the land, according to how we live and survive. And these things don't have a voice. They can't shout up for themselves. They can't defend themselves. They can't protest if they don't think things are going well. They just quietly disappear. And so, trying to give a voice for nature is a very complicated thing, because it's trying to bring people to an awareness of all of this wonder and diversity, but also of that sharing, to get people to think beyond their human boundaries.
I just think it's so uplifting and joyous, and I just feel so grateful and so blessed that I live here, and that you can share it with other people. You know, there are so few places that are free to go to where people feel truly welcome. They can just be here for as long as they like, and that's really special to me.
Notice how you put wellies on?
We've got 20 cows, 250 sheep, 2 pigs, 2 horses and a pony. I was born in Brimley, which is by Bovey Tracy. I moved to Ilsington, which was 6 miles away when I was 3, and then I moved here when I was 6 years old. My parents took on the tenancy here. It's a Duchy of Cornwall farm. It was very dilapidated. There wasn't any mains electricity, there's still no mains water. And it felt very far from everywhere, it was very remote. Really tough for a young couple with a young child to take on a tenanted farm, I think. And I really admire my parents for doing that. My dad came as a young man. He was maybe, I don't think he was 27 when he came here. He was full of the vim and vigour of young men, and he wanted to take this place and make it into a productive farm, agriculturally productive. And climatically, it's a very difficult farm, it's very wet. All his time working so hard against what he saw as constraints. And then he couldn't take it anymore, and he left, and my mum took it on, and she entered into one of the first management agreements here on Dartmoor. A more holistic way of managing the archaeology and of integrating the farming into it. She was very forward thinking for her time. My mum planted quite a lot of trees, particularly to make shelter and shade for the livestock barns, to keep them nice and cool in the summer. These are goat willow. They're not particularly rare. They're fantastic for nature. They have the first pollen and they come into flower early in the year. So when you've got insects looking for a feed, they're like the first thing that's available for them. And you often see lots of insects hovering around them in the sort of the weak spring sunshine. When I was 16, I left and I travelled and I worked in lots of different places, and then I went to university and studied agriculture and rural resource management, and then I did a master's in landscape ecology, and that really opened my mind to the science and evidence side of it. I come down here if I'm struggling with a conundrum or something and I can't quite tease it out. I find the sound of the river and the greenness and the texture of the bark and the dappled light. I just find it deeply nourishing and just wonderful. And I know that I'm not alone, because quite often I'll come down and there'll be other people here enjoying this space. But what I find amazing is lots of people come here and yet there's no sign, there's no damage. Everything's still, soft and verdant and green. You never find litter. And I think there's obviously a feeling to this place that other people cherish as well. The different sounds of the water, and sometimes you get the susurrus in the trees and the smell of the wet earth. Yeah, it's just, who knows what it is, whether it's a combination. It's just gorgeous. It's just an amazing place by the public right-of-way for people to come and sit on the bench and just look at wildlife. In the summer you get the swallows and the house martins drinking and collecting mud from the edges, and then later you get dragonflies, and sometimes you get to see hunting hobbies. They come down, these tiny little hawks, and they'll feast on the little dragonflies, and watching them hunt is spectacular. And this is a really special place for a lot of people to come. We've had people propose and accept here, and this is, I think it's lovely that people that don't live here have this deep spiritual connection to this place. We're just here for a tiny amount of time. People have lived at Challacombe for 4,000 odd years now, and they've been here and been working and living and dying, and that continuum of time, and we're just like a little blip, and then we'll go and somebody else will take the farm on, and hopefully they'll look after it too. And the superabundance of nature that lives alongside history here. Mark doesn't come from a farming background at all, and I think that's the bit that's really important, actually. Mark comes from Torquay. He hasn't, he had a pet dog when he was a child, but no livestock. And he came with an open mind, and So when I would say things to him like, right, what we're going to do now is we're going to go and do so-and-so, you know, this thing that my parents had done. We were going to go and worm the sheep. And he would say, but why? Do they need worming? You know, worming is expensive. It's, you know, a couple of £100 every time you do it. And I would go, but that's what we do now. And he would say, but why? And it was true. He would then go off with his little jam jar and collect samples of poo from the sheep, take them to the vets, and the vets will do a fecal egg count, and they test the poo and say, the sheep don't need worming, and that costs £6 maybe. And so you've saved hundreds of pounds, but I never made that connection because that's what my tradition, my mindset told me I had to do.
So this, the black and white one, is this cow's daughter, the black cow's daughter. So all of this is open access. And we need to have cattle that are lovely and quiet, that aren't spooked by people and dogs.
And everybody would say to us, well, you're nearly organic, why aren't you certified? And we went, right, okay, so the thing to do is to have less animals, better animals, and produce the meat and sell it direct to our customers. You know, our customers that are walking through the farm.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. And it wasn't a revelatory moment where we went, whoa, road to Damascus. It was a kind of gradual move. It just feels like the farm has gone, we can breathe now, you know, this is what we need. There's no fighting against nature. There's no fighting with the animals. There's no, you know, there's no shouting. There's none of that. It's all very relaxed. And I think that comes through in how the place feels. It feels welcoming. Right, so we're going to go into the bog. Here at Challacombe, we have blanket bog. And blanket bog is where peat has formed. We graze this area with our cattle. And our cattle are quite light. They're from North Devon, so they're local cattle that are adapted to eating a nutrient-poor diet, but also they're happy going out onto a very wet area. This is a cow's hoof print from a couple of years ago where it would have pushed down and created a wet patch. And in this little area we've got little bits of heather coming. We've got baby Molinia. We've got some sphagnum moss colonising. And you just look at that tiny bit of sphagnum moss and look how much water it holds. So this soil is capturing carbon. It's laying down carbon into the peat below all the time as the vegetation rots down. It's incorporated into the peat body. And it's a fantastic sponge for water that falls from the sky and also that comes in through the groundwater. And so the bog itself is purifying the water, but it's also acting as a water regulator. So it's holding a huge amount of water here and then it gradually lets it out. And that water flows down and into the stream, and that protects people that live downstream from us, you know, other citizens. It stops those real peaks of water flow, and that can help with flooding and downstream issues. All of those different niches that are so fantastic for biodiversity. And it's the need to have farming and nature conservation together. And you can produce food, and you can be great for nature at the same time.
If Dartmoor is calling, what is it saying?
Help me, I think. And to me it's saying help me because we know that we're in a climate and nature crisis. We know that we've got the evidence of how to make Dartmoor better and more resilient. Every farmer has a role to play, but I think every citizen does as well. We mustn't feel powerless. You know, I can make a big difference here because I've got a big bit of land, but every individual can make a contribution.
Dartmoor's really important because it's this amazing protected landscape, and loads of people come here. But actually, all of our countryside is important, and our protected landscapes sit alone like islands, and we must think about how we join them up and make everything more resilient so that nature can move as it needs to, but also that people can get joy everywhere. And how important it is to think about nature in towns and how each individual's action can make a real difference and be really positive for nature through all our lives.
I do not own anything, no penny to my name. This land does not belong to me, but I belong to every blade of grass. And you'll find we are under the same stars tonight, and the right to roam is our right. We are under the same stars tonight.
Thanks so much, everybody, for coming out today on what is a pretty classic Dartmoor day.
Dartmoor is always in my heart. For me, it is a really special place.
I've been asking not for the crumbs, but for the love.